going to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker today is Kenton Sumpner. He's an entomologist with the Maryland Department of Agriculture. He joined the department in 2021 to work exclusively on the spotted lanternfly. He did his undergrad work at Frostburg State University and grad school at Virginia Tech. He initially became interested in insects when he was involved with rodent research in the Republic of Panama as an undergrad. Since then, he has wanted to make an impact in the field of entomology by investigating and managing invasive insect species in a forest setting. So welcome today. Kenton will be presenting information about spotted lanternfly.
In the States for a little bit longer, but we have been trying to do our best, and a lot of things have changed recently with the quarantine that we've had going on, with our own survey and treatment efforts, and just kind of with the movement of the lanternfly population. So what I'm going to do today is go through some lanternfly background, just a little bit of life history, a little bit of the threats that they pose, kind of why we're doing what we're doing, and then get into what the state is doing to suppress, and kind of what we're hoping Marylanders and Maryland businesses can do to get on board as well and help us out. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Just starting with some background. Lanternfly, it is an invasive species, non-native invasive. It comes to us from regions of southern China, and I believe some areas of northern India as well. It's actually been kind of a long-known invasive species. It is an invader in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, and it was something that USDA was already on the lookout for before it even arrived. When it was discovered in Pennsylvania back in 2014, it wasn't a mystery insect. It was seen and identified, and measures were taken to begin quarantining it and surveying for it. Unfortunately, it's since spread quite far since then, but it has some characteristics that make it especially difficult to manage as an invasive species. Just as way of some background, it's only got a single generation per year. It has to sexually reproduce as well. A number of our pests, Hemlock woolly adelgid for one, are what we call parthenogenic, so they can actually clone themselves. At least these insects can't do that. They have a very simple kind of lifestyle. They're also what we call true bugs. So if people are curious, they're often mistaken for moths or butterflies or things like that. These insects have a lifestyle, or a life history rather, where they begin as eggs, hatch out into nymphs, molt through several different instars, several different nymphal instars, and then finally molt into an adult, which then will mate and lay the eggs. So that's our incomplete metamorphosis. There's no pupa or anything like that, the way that a butterfly would. These guys are hemipterans. They're true bugs. They're not beetles or flies or anything like that, despite the name. And they are sexually dimorphic too. In the next slide I have, you can actually see that the females are noticeably larger than the males, especially when it gets to be the breeding season, when it gets to be September and October. The females will become gravid and will be much larger than the males, much easier to see when they have all those eggs inside of them. And this little chart is handy for just trying to figure out exactly how the different life stages relate to each other in size, because I'm kind of understanding that folks don't really appreciate how tiny the first instar and even the second instar really are. They frequently get missed. So when you're looking for these insects, I imagine most of the folks here are aware that things like tree of heaven, walnuts, black walnuts, grapes, roses, even some like garden vegetables, like zucchinis, beans, tomatoes, things like that. The smallest, excuse me, the smallest nymphal instars will just scatter all over that kind of stuff. And people might not realize what they're looking at because they're very tiny. The first instars are like 3 millimeters long, black, white spots, kind of an elongated head. And you can see them stacked up against the other instars. What we have right now are thirds, largely molting into fourths. That molt period has really begun. And by the end of this month, we should start seeing the adults molting. So if you look on the chart, the third and the fourth are where we are right now. And I imagine folks in Montgomery County are seeing them. We've certainly been around the county looking for them and finding some pretty healthy populations, unfortunately. There's also the description of the egg mass. That size egg mass in the picture is actually fairly accurate to the scale. on the top of the picture, that 2.5 centimeter gradation up there. The egg masses are about the size of an adult. When they're very fresh, they'll be that gray and not quite that shiny. I think that might be a flash from a camera going off, but they are very light gray. And once you see them and realize what you're looking for, they're fairly easy to see. Sometimes you'll find them uncovered. It'll just be lines of eggs laid, maybe partially covered or wholly covered or just completely uncovered. But that's a life stage that that'll be only present during the wintertime. These insects are, as I said, only a single generation per year. This year, they actually did not hatch out in May. Over on the right-hand side of this picture, you'll see that the time frame for the hatch and the first instar is May through June. This year, we found our first instars in April, I believe April 17th was our first instar hatch. And they are getting going earlier, unfortunately, as the seasons are getting warmer. They're able to get out earlier. There's less mortality over the winter. And we'll see how long they persist into this into the fall as well. But for right now, we expect them to go and continue molting. By the end of the month, like I said, they'll be into their adult phase. August, they'll be largely molting into adults. And then from August through the first frosts of November, hopefully November, but maybe December, they'll have adults flying around and doing their thing. They'll start laying their eggs in September, really like into October is where you start seeing the first egg masses being laid down. Also, the tree of heaven that I'll talk about soon is their primary host. That tree goes into senescence in September, which means that it begins to fall asleep, basically. It begins to shut down for the wintertime. So they will leave that tree and they'll begin swarming and looking for new hosts and moving on to new hosts, looking for mates and looking for places to lay their eggs, beginning September, going through October. And that's really where we get most of our lanternfly reporting, is when they just get really, really obnoxious and really wind up in new places, is that September to October period. And then overwintering, through October through the following April, we'll see egg masses. And they start off nice and shiny gray, and they kind of start to get drier and more brown and cracked as the winter goes on. And then egg masses too, they tend to be very cryptic. Lanternflies are very good at hiding, and one of the things that makes it difficult and invasive to handle. They tend to put their egg masses in the trees that they like to eat, all the host trees they enjoy. They'll stick them under branches or on the side of bark, or on the sides of trunks rather. But they will also place egg masses on man-made structures, just ground cover like rocks or lawn debris, felled logs, things like that. The kind of single defining set of characteristics is that they prefer flat surfaces and vertical surfaces. So flat vertical surfaces are what they're looking for to lay their egg masses on. Otherwise, they can be pretty widely distributed. They're also really, really good at hitchhiking is the other one. They're notorious for jumping on a vehicle and riding down the interstate to a new location. The way in which they feed, the damage they do, is through sap sucking. So these insects don't bore through trees. They don't defoliate. They won't even do the kind of pruning that cicadas were so notorious for doing. These guys will latch onto a branch or some herby piece of material, and will just stick their proboscis into it and draw out the photosynthate or the sap. And that's how they do their damage. They're just stealing those nutrients from the plant that it would otherwise have to put towards fruit production or sequester for the winter, and even just like conduct effective photosynthesis. So that's the damage their feeding will do. They have a ton of hosts. Spotted lanternfly, this is the conservative number, is 70 plus plant species. I think it's actually up to about 112 now, individual plant species that they'll feed on in North America. So that's another characteristic that makes them very difficult to manage, is that even though they vastly prefer tree of heaven, they're not obligates of it. They don't have to have it. And they occur in their native range, and it's not alongside tree of heaven in some instances. So they can eat a lot of other species. They love grape, black walnut, silver maples, red maples, willow, eastern white pine. There's the species we really look for. But we'll frequently find them on tulip tree, sycamore, black cherry. What else? I'm drawing a blank right now. A lot of different stuff. And as they're little nymphs too, they tend to eat even a wider diversity of tree species and plant herb species. So you'll find them frequently in your gardens as little nymphs feeding on garden plants. The good news is they don't seem to be generally correlated with plant death. They're not murdering everything that they eat. They are stealing nutrients. They are making it hard for the plants to photosynthesize. They're definitely major sources of stress. But what we've come to see is that they're not just defoliating, not destroying vast tracts of forest or just annihilating people's gardens. So with some management, your greens should survive on your property despite lanternfly feeding. And then another note, they really enjoy the maples. Once Tree of Heaven starts to go to sleep, it's the red maples and the silver maples that they really will track over to in September and October. Now, the impacts of spotted lanternfly, these are the reasons why we're doing what we do, is what we have right here. And it's largely broken down between economic, ecological, and public impacts. As far as the economic side of things, they threaten a number of different industries. The most demonstrative or most heavily impacted, I guess, industry is going to be vineyards. For Marylanders, vineyards over in Eastern Maryland, in Cecil and Harford, Baltimore County, have experienced a lot of pressure from lanternfly feeding and have experienced damage on their vines from lanternfly feeding as well. Some folks have accused lanternfly of actually reducing the harvest that they're getting. And that's a hard one to exactly say yes or no that that's happening, just because there have been a lot of other exacerbating factors like drought and things like that that might also be making grape harvests a little bit less significant or a little less large. But it still exists. Lanternfly are there. They're forcing growers to use more pesticide to control them. And vineyard owners are reporting that their vines are just almost getting bruised by lanternfly, or they're getting damaged, and the vines are less able to heal from like pruning or something like that because of lanternfly feeding. But they're also a threat to forestry, nurseries, orchards, all those kinds of things. We want to go and maintain a high level of education amongst businesses that are associated with those products, just so they don't start suffering economic loss from lanternfly. The Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania put together kind of a rough economic impact. They are ballparking in the hundreds of millions of dollars if lanternfly were to be let to go and run amok. Maryland has not done a similar kind of impact, but the scope of their infestation and just the sheer presence of insects, there's so many of them that I think without some pretty effective management, you probably would see vineyards going down if they weren't actively trying to defend themselves. And that kind of activity will wind up as an increased cost passed on to consumers because of all that. They also are kind of an ecological threat. So recent research as of last year shows that they suppress photosynthesis in, I believe it was red maple trees in studies that they were feeding on. And it was found they were suppressing photosynthesis up to 50% on the stems that they were feeding on. So it's debatable whether or not lanternfly is a forest pest, but certainly they're a tree pest, and they tend to use trees as kind of their reservoirs, especially for like overnight where they go and hide out, and where they lay their egg masses. They'll be up in those tree canopies, and they'll obviously be feeding very heavily from those same trees. So it's not known how much damage they're doing, but there's certainly a substantial pest of those trees, and certainly don't make life easier for them. And the very last thing, which is kind of the biggest impact, honestly, I think, to Marylanders, is that they're a huge public nuisance. These two pictures are from Pennsylvania. The one on the right is a tree that just has thousands and thousands of lanternfly just coating it. I've not seen them that bad myself, but I have seen almost that bad. And that kind of thing is something that people have to deal with, even on the sides of their homes, in places like Haverty Grace, Perryville, now moving into Baltimore County, or over in Hagerstown last year. People said they couldn't go outside, they couldn't enjoy doing anything just because these lanternfly were so dense, jumping on you as you're trying to go outside, or getting stuck in your air conditioners, or clogging your pool filters. And they attract stinging insects because when the lanternfly feed, they excrete the honeydew. So that's there, it's molding on the ground, killing grass or disfiguring buildings, disfiguring trees and ornamentals. There's bald-faced hornets and there's yellow jackets and everything coming to feed on the honeydew. It just makes her a very unpleasant insect to have to live beside. And then the picture on the left is actually from Philadelphia. It's over in Temple University. they'll be in heavily urban settings too. And that's another, like, the kind of the final factor that makes them a really difficult pest to manage, is that they're not just a forest pest or an ag pest. They are a city pest. They're in Hagerstown for us, they're in Baltimore. They're in all 5 boroughs of New York City. They're like on top of skyscrapers. I think it was the top of the, what did they say? But something like the 50th floor of the Chrysler building or something. Somebody found a lanternfly in like a planter outside. And that means you can't just roll through and spray insecticides on every inch of a major city. That's a huge public health risk. So you have to resort to other methods to try and get a hold of lanternfly, get a handle of it. And this is just for anybody interested in grapes. I'd recommend Harner et al. From 2022. Kind of breaks down exactly how feeding on a grapevine can impact that grape. The takeaway from this is basically a very small number of lanternfly feeding on a vine will cause a negative impact on its ability to store carbon. Just like 8 insects per branch will start to negatively impact it. And we removed hundreds of thousands of insects from one vineyard in particular over the course of the winter when we were doing our treatments. So absolutely it exists, or the risk exists for vineyards to be very negatively impacted by spotted lanternfly. This is just a rundown of what I was going to be talking about today. So I'm just going to go through these different things. So this is a really handy map. If anyone's curious, this is the extent of the infestation in in the United States to date. All the states will go and contribute to New York at Cornell, I believe, and they will put together this combined map of places with reproducing populations, which are in the blue counties. Hitchhikers, individual life stages found without all 3 present at once, egg, nymph, and adult. And those are the purple dots. And then the red outlines are where states have implemented quarantines around counties. And as you can see, it is all throughout the Eastern Seaboard. A majority of some states, Pennsylvania is about filled up, Maryland's about filled up with quarantine infestations. Delaware and New Jersey are end to end. Every single county has an infestation, every single county is under quarantine. And you can also see the really far-flung infestations in the Great Lakes, out in Indiana, even down through North Carolina, and the kind of, especially in North Carolina, the kind of scattered hitchhikers and individual life stages that have been found in counties that are, substantially farther away from the infestation. So the insect has moved quite a great deal since 2014 when it was found, about 10 years ago. And that's cars, that's trucks, and the big one is railways. Trains are really bad for moving spotted lanternfly. For Maryland, in order to try and slow down the spread, we have implemented a quarantine. This was from 2019. It was the first year of the quarantine, and we covered Harford and Cecil counties. That's where our infestations first popped up. Cecil County, just right in the center of Cecil, was where the first infestation occurred. And the purpose of the quarantine is to, on one side, to get businesses and public agencies to inspect any regulated article that they're going to try and move, and make sure those articles are clear of lanternfly before they move them. It does not require treatments like on properties or require treatment of a regulated article, but it does require that it be inspected and that inspection be recorded. For the public side of things, it kind of directs where we put our public education and outreach efforts, which I'll detail a little bit later. But we're not really in the position of being able to eradicate lanternfly. Trying to eradicate any invasive is, while not impossible, is such a tall order that it might not really be realistic. But what we're trying to do is slow the spread of lanternfly to new locations, just to improve the lives of people that live in those uninfested areas, improve, or at least preserve, the business prospects for growers in those areas, and just, keep the ecology safe in those areas too, as long as we can. And the infestations aren't contiguous in each county. They're like hot spots in counties. So even within our oldest infestations, there's still parts of Harford or Baltimore County or Cecil County that have never seen lanternfly. And that's why this quarantine exists. It's why even within the quarantine, we still require inspections. Even if you're moving an article inside of Harford, say, you still need to inspect it if you're moving it around. And that's just to go and keep those pristine areas still pristine, even if they are inside of a quarantine. We've expanded the quarantine because we've discovered more instances of infestations in other counties. And this kind of also gives us the ability to enter properties to do surveys, create treatment agreements with people, and try and do a little bit of suppression, as well as continuing that inspection of vehicles, other regulated articles, and just public education. This is the quarantine as of this year. We're not going to go and change it again until next year if it needs to be. These are the counties that we're working in as far as a lot of our treatments and outreach goes. And I'm very curious to see what Lanternfly winds up doing. This is kind of a more population-oriented picture, and this is the rough level of infestation per county. It kind of shows you that while north central Maryland and kind of the northern shore are relatively heavily infested, Baltimore County and Baltimore City being our most heavily infested this year, the extent, like kind of the edges of Maryland, seem to be relatively lanternfly free. We've had hitchhikers in pretty much every county, but we've not been able to substantiate a reproducing population in the green counties. So way out the end of Garrett, Charles, St. Mary's, Calvert, Worcester, Somerset, and Dorchester. And here's hoping they stay clear. I don't know exactly what conditions keep them lanternfly free, but we're going to keep looking for them in those areas. And this map is kind of nifty. It is a, excuse me, sorry. It is the survey. This is what we wind up seeing on the back end of the public-facing survey that folks may or may not be familiar with, but it's another one of our outreach efforts. We have tried to get folks to report when they see lanternfly online, as opposed to calling us or emailing us, because we get so many thousands of calls that it's just impossible to try and respond to all of them. Last year, we got 11,500 responses on our survey on this kind of map. And we also got 5,000, I think, emails and phone calls. And we have to respond to every one of those emails and phone calls. The survey, not quite the same. This is just for spotting lanternfly. I encourage anybody listening here, if you see it, report through the survey. If you want management questions, have management questions, or are curious about something else spotted lanternfly related, then send us an email or leave a phone message or something like that, and we'll get back to you. We just can't respond to the survey. There's just too many reports. But it does help us see where the infestation is going, can dictate a little bit of our survey and treatment regime as much as we can. And yeah, we'll just kind of exist for posterity because we can save all this stuff. But this map in particular is the beginning of lanternfly last year, January through May. So this is old egg masses, some leftover dead adults from the previous winter, and then the first hatch. And this is what people told us about last year. Last year, Hagerstown was super hot, Harford County was super hot, and you can see the scattering leftover pieces in some areas of Frederick and Carroll, a little bit in northern Baltimore around Pretty Boy, and then some scattered bits in Kent County and Montgomery. And that one over in Assateague was never identified, so I can't tell you if it made it out that far or not. Or I'm sorry, that might actually just be, I think it was Assateague all the way down there. In June, we have our hatch. We've got second and third instars here. You can see immediately all the dots pop up. We've got old infestations we'd found the year before in New Windsor, Sykesville. Those are starting to grow. Our Kent County is also an old infestation, so some more reports coming from those rural areas. But still in this time frame, it's building up in Harford, northern Baltimore, some areas of Cecil and Hagerstown. Then in July, we'll start to get the adults, and people start seeing them even more. The Sykesville and New Windsor sites in Frederick and Howard really start blowing up. Westminster in Carroll is also an older infestation. It starts to really get much more magnified. And for the first time, we identify lanternfly in Cumberland. And this is all because those adults are so much more, charismatic, large. People can see them. They fly, and yeah. And then moving down transportation areas too. So you'll start to see indications they're going down. 270 is an easy one to see, but 70 going out 68 towards Cumberland. That kind of transportation movement is really much more apparent. In August, talking full adults, it's wall to wall in some areas. Washington County is pretty much enemy territory at this point. Lots of hitchhikers going around. We try and identify them where they show up. So like Salisbury, we'll run out there and try and find them. Haven't found them yet. Somehow they're around there somewhere. We just haven't located them ourselves yet. In September, we start to see the swarming going on. I wish I'd included the number of tips in this map, but at this point it starts to like double between September and October from what it was previously, because the bugs are leaving Tree of Heaven looking for new host. People are seeing them all over the place, and September and October are busy reporting months. November it starts to slow down, and by December, this is what Marylanders told us that lanternfly looked like at the end of 2022. 11,500 responses, I think millions of bugs. They're not reliable numbers. This is not rigorous scientific data, but it gives you an indication of where lanternfly are in the state and kind of how bad they are. And it can be rough in the areas where they're dense. They are dense and hard to live beside. Now there's some stuff going on to try and manage these guys. The trapping that we do is not as a management tool. It is a tool to find out where they're going, to see if areas have been invaded. We'll look for host trees, usually Tree of Heaven, and put a trap on that and see if they'll come to it, to go and determine if they've invaded a new area, or just to confirm if they exist. You know, if they're still in some location, maybe that would be like a historical infestation site. But I would also recommend trapping as a method of management for residents and businesses. You don't need any chemicals with them. You can build them out of some very cheap materials, or you can buy them. And if you could find a tree where the lanternfly are congregating, put a trap on it. You'll get some passive management, so you don't have to be out there smacking them by hand. Maybe you don't have to go and rely on those chemicals to manage them, and you just check that trap. We check them bi-weekly, so just go out there every 2 weeks and empty the bag, clean it out, make sure nothing's in there that doesn't want to be in there, and just keep using it. There's some DIY videos through Penn State and through New Jersey. I think Duke Farm has a really good YouTube video of how to go and create one of these things and how to put it up on a tree. And these traps are nice too, the circle traps, because they are way less likely to have bycatch like birds or tree frogs or mice or things like that, as opposed to an adhesive band, which while easy to use and effective, can damage insects. Damage other animals that you might not want to have stuck to a trap. But there is some use. If you do want to go the adhesive route, I really don't recommend it. But if you want to use it, I would say only rely on it early in the season. The nymphs are really terrible climbers. So on the trees that they're climbing on, they tend to fall off really frequently and then climb back up the trunk. So if you take that adhesive band and stick it down by the root flare, maybe like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 inches off the ground, and then just regularly check it, I'd say like daily or maybe even twice a day or something, to try and catch all those nymphs that are falling and then climbing and getting stuck, and maybe have a good impact early in the season. So like May, June, and then maybe plan to be taking down those adhesive traps at the end of June, maybe mid-July or something. The band I have right here that's advertised is actually a bug barrier. So it is non-adhesive on the outside. The adhesive part is on the interior of the plastic band, and there's cotton batting that kind of holds it off the side of the tree and prevents stuff from falling down through the top. So the insects will climb up underneath of it and get stuck, and that should reduce the risk of any other animal getting stuck to it. It is expensive, but if you want to use it, I'd say do bug barrier and put it down around the bottom to catch nymphs, as opposed to exposed adhesive all year long up higher on the tree, and maybe you'll save some bird lives that way. DIY, this link will take you to Penn State's do-it-yourself, basic household materials, easy to build, pretty easy to maintain. You can also buy them for about $18 a pop too, so that's an option as well. If folks are interested, I could tell you on where to go and get those. We also do surveys. I don't want to linger too long on this because a lot of this is kind of, I guess, it kind of makes sense once you hear it. Basically, we find out where they are. We make a buffer where that surrounds where the insects are that we found, and then we try and delimit how far the infestation goes. So if folks have experienced this, we'll be sending out letters, to let properties know that we're going to be coming to survey, give everyone a heads up, even schedule some surveys, and then actually go there and look for the insects. We'll go and issue treatment release forms too, if people can agree to let us come on and do some managing, that, we'll have those signed then too. But that's actually a fairly straightforward process, just a matter of letting folks know what we're doing. And if folks here receive letters from our surveys, then you're familiar with what it looks like. We also kind of have a system of priorities. Right now, we're really looking at vineyards, our at-risk agriculture, and our satellite sites. These are infestations that are removed from the larger infestations. We're trying to find small populations that we can get on the edges of the infestation and try and treat those and knock them down and have some hope of actually like lowering that population, as opposed to working in the middle of a heavily infested area that's just going to get constantly reinvaded as soon as we finish our work for the day. And those are just the state's priorities right now. There are a bunch of different treatment methods. So just to kind of give folks an idea of what's available, mechanical is killing them by hand, and that's what I recommend. I really would caution people against using chemicals, and probably with this group, that's not a huge concern either. But insecticides are going to have non-target effects. You're going to accidentally kill beneficials. You could expose yourself to, a pyrethroid or something that might not be great for your body. Pets, kids, there's a residual period on all those synthetic insecticides that you have to go and take into account. Mechanical methods are very work intensive, but they're going to keep you safe, keep your beneficials safe, and I think the impact of widely using chemical insecticides is going to maybe be worse than lanternfly itself. So I say squish them by hand, trap them, crush egg masses during the winter. That's a great one for management, is just to find those egg masses and crush them, because they don't go anywhere. They can't run away. And there's like 30 bugs per egg mass. So if you find a bunch all cloistered together, you're killing hundreds of bugs right there just by crushing them, and do crush them too. We've been saying scrape for years, but there's the risk that an egg mass could survive scraping, might just fall on the ground. So we say get something flat, crush them, hear the pop and the crackle, and make sure they're dead. For chemical options, there's contact insecticides and systemic insecticides. Contacts, there's some less toxic options, especially when they're nymphs. Horticultural oils, insecticidal soaps, neem oil can all be effective, but get to be less effective as they become adults. There's usually no residual period. It can take a while for them to suffocate, or for the neem oil to take effect with that feeding inhibitory response. So you're not just going to have all your bugs drop dead if you start using that kind of stuff, as opposed to like a synthetic insecticide that might kill them very quickly, but has the issue with long residual periods, or exposure to you or exposure to the environment. And for systemics, it's basically down to neonicotinoids, which may actually be illegal in Montgomery County, not positive. So double check with that before you go and hire a contractor, and they'll probably tell you they can't use it too. This I recommend only for use on Tree of Heaven. Do not systematize native tree species, because it will kill any insect that feeds on that tree. It'll bioaccumulate in the fruit and could make its way onto animals that eat that fruit too. So just don't do it. Tree of Heaven, systematize it after the flowers are gone and the females. So like, I think end of July, something like that. And then don't bother with it once it gets to be about September. It'll be senescing at that point. So you pretty much have a window of opportunity, the end of July and August, to do systemics on Tree of Heaven. And the very last one is cultural. This is removing Tree of Heaven, or removing host in general. You can. It is cost intensive, work intensive, but you will make your property less attractive to lanternfly. You may actually make the lanternfly more attractive to predators, which is kind of a cool potential benefit. They seem to be deriving a metabolite from Tree of Heaven that makes them unpalatable to predators. And if they can't eat Tree of Heaven, the birds and the praying mantises might be more inclined to eat lanternfly. So that would be kind of cool. But it has come to our attention, Tree of Heaven has been accused of causing skin rashes in some people when they come into contact with the sap. And in very rare cases, it has been shown that, or rather I should say it's been claimed, that Tree of Heaven can cause myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscles. This only seems to be in the case where people with open wounds have the sap exposed to that wound, and then also have to kind of be handling a lot of it for a long time, and have some kind of predisposition towards that kind of reaction. So my general recommendation is, if people are handling Tree of Heaven, especially if you're cutting it or ripping it out, wear PPE, have gloves, long sleeves, long pants, closed-toed shoes, and cover your face up too. Protect yourself, and wash thoroughly. Get that dish detergent out there and scrub. Maybe think of it almost like poison ivy. Scrub it all off when you're done, and try and keep yourself safe from any potential exposure to that irritating sap. Again, our priorities: agriculture is our big one, and then our satellite infestations. I'm just going to kind of go through these. Basically, we killed a lot of bugs in 2022 and a lot of egg masses, and we destroyed them with a golden pest spray oil. It was a dormant oil. We decided that was a little bit too much of a hassle and switched over to using mechanical means, treating over 2022 to 2023, and we destroyed a lot of egg masses. We crushed, let's see, all last winter, we crushed 32,760 egg masses, mostly around vineyards, mostly in Baltimore County, and that's 30 bugs per egg mass. So I don't know, that 700,000, 800,000 insects in the course of a few months. And that's a lot of bugs, particularly around one vineyard. We killed like 21,000 egg masses. And that was like basically on the vines and like right adjacent to the vines. So the population pressure these lanternfly can exert is incredible. And I couldn't even guess at how many lanternfly are in the state. But when you set your mind to destroying them, you realize how many there are. And then we also try to get out some satellite locations and try and get out to major transportation areas like BWI to make sure they're not accidentally moving lanternfly, because they got them, unfortunately. We do lots of outreach, and this is just part of it, but we also try and get our foot in the door with billboards, mailers to businesses, online ads. We're really trying to diversify the kind of merchandising and advertising that we do. That's largely a lot of stuff that I do. I got the title of entomologist, but I'm really just an ad guy, which is kind of fun, but it's a new skill set, so that's neat. If anybody has not seen it yet, this is what our ads look like. This is out on Route 50 near Cambridge. We had it up for a while, and we're just trying to catch people, let them know what lanternfly looks like and who to talk to. So let your friends know too, if you see lanternfly, tell it to the Department of Agriculture and then stomp on it, because we don't want these bugs left alive. And we got lots of merch. It's available to public groups. So, UMD, Extension, Master Gardener, Master Naturalists, schools. We try and get all this stuff out here with good lanternfly education and just fun items too, to kind of, brighten up the day while you're killing bugs. An ad campaign, very effective. I could talk more about that if folks are interested, but this is a new thing we tried last year, was partnering with the Baltimore Sun to do digital ads, and it seems to be very effective. So it's something we're going to go and try again, and hopefully it's even better, and we'll get more people interested in lanternfly. For folks that haven't seen it yet, and considering Montgomery is kind of a new infestation, it is worthwhile to go to our website. I recommend searching MDA spotted lanternfly, and this is the very first thing on our website. It's a link to our survey. You can tell us where you found lanternfly, how many you found. We require a photograph to go and keep quality control going on, but this is where to report it. And then if we need to, we'll get back in touch with you. If you don't want us to call you, then just don't put any contact information. I think we require a name, but that's about it. And then that's really what we're looking for from Marylanders' cooperation, is just like at least tell us what you're looking at, and then please step on it. Because we got lots of emails. That's just a way of describing last year what we got. About 4,000 phone calls and emails and 11,500 survey reports. And this is out of date. I'm just going to skip this slide. We got way more than this now. Now, the very last part here is not going to be super pertinent for folks that don't own businesses, but just to kind of go over what we're doing to give folks an idea of like one of the state's initiatives. This permitting system is linked to the quarantine, and this is basically the requirement by the quarantine order to have businesses, public agencies, inspect any regulated article, which can be kind of anything, but really is going to be stuff that is hauled, transported, vehicles, cargo containers, nursery stock, stuff like that, that could potentially have lanternfly on it. That's near an infestation, has been exposed. We want those articles inspected. We want them cleaned off as much as they can be, and then a record of that inspection made. So we encourage a single representative from a business to come to our site, get the training, click on that little link that's circled in red, and then get permitted. And that person can then train their coworkers. If we need anything from them, we can get in touch with them, and they can develop their own spotted lanternfly training and inspection system. And hopefully that'll slow it down. We're not trying to paint a target on people's backs. If folks want to go and participate, this is the law. But we understand too that it's kind of a work in progress. We want folks to not feel like this is going to just set them up to go and get a fine. This is really about us trying to get people educated and getting rid of lanternfly when they find it. not hiding it because they're worried that we're going to come in and get after them. We want to work with businesses and work with people to manage their lanternfly, not just punish people for having this bug. Yeah, I already talked about all this stuff. The takeaway from this slide: lanternfly is going to get worse. I expect to see it in new and different areas this year, and it is what we're seeing. Last year, Hagerstown was awful. Hartford was awful. There are still really bad places in those counties, but this year, Baltimore City and Baltimore County are exploding. And it could be availability of food, it could be more transportation in those areas, or less predator population. So many different factors. I couldn't tell you why the population moves the way that it does, but it is moving. And I'm very curious to see, with the data that we're collecting, how it kind of shakes out. And I'm getting close to the end here too. We're working on about 11 o'clock, so I'll probably try and wrap it up just in the next 10 minutes or so. There is some biocontrol work. For anybody who's curious, biocontrol is the very best way to try and control an invasive species, be it, using a fungus, using a bacteria, or using a predatory or a parasitoid wasp. People can't do enough by themselves. You need an agent that will go after your pest 24/7. And we try and find things that are very specific to spotted lanternfly. And we're working on it. It is ongoing. There have been a lot of stories that popped up recently about anistatus, a little bit about dryaenus. They're not in any way ready to be released. There's difficulties in rearing them. There's difficulties in rearing spotted lanternfly in the lab to act as a host for these insects. You'd figure lanternfly would be easy to keep alive in a lab setting, but apparently they're not. So that's something that has to be kind of, fine-tuned and developed just as a method. The options that we have, we've got egg parasitoids, we've got some nymphal parasitoids. That's what dryaenus will do, which is kind of neat. And then we have one left over from 1908 that was imported to destroy spongy moth, formerly known as gypsy moth. So that's kind of cool. And I think there's some indications too, there's some native parasitoids, maybe some, kind of ichneumoniid or Burkoniid wasps that are going after lanternfly, which is neat. More power to the natives. I'd rather not have to import anybody. But for what it's worth, there is a biocontrol program that's being investigated. There's some entomopathogens. Nothing is really showing like a natural level to control lanternfly. All these guys occur in nature. It's just none of them occur in a great enough quantity to be noticeably affecting lanternfly. If folks are familiar with the spongy moth program, Entomophaga mamiga was introduced to destroy spongy moth, and it can actually go and maintain high enough population in the environment to substantially destroy spongy moth. That's not the case here. It'd be cool to develop an entomopathogen. Several are under investigation, but nothing's really guaranteed. Bavaria is neat though, because it is a biopesticide, and I believe it's widely available in just garden supply stores. So if you want another option for a pesticide, you could consider a Bavaria bassiana formulation. It is generally entomopathogenic, so you will get non-target effects. If you hose your entire garden off, you're going to have a lot of little bugs covered in mothballs or cotton balls, but you will kill lanternfly. It is very lethal to them, and I believe more lethal to the males than the females, interestingly. Not sure why that is. And our natives are doing work too. Garden spiders, wheel bugs, praying mantises, birds. Looking at the, what do they call it? Birds biting bad bugs from Pennsylvania. Cardinals, blue jays, domestic chickens are a huge one. Gray catbirds. Yeah, I think those are the ones that are the biggest birds that have been seen going after lanternfly. But praying mantis are the one that people see more than anything else. I've seen pictures of garden spiders, I think little jumping spiders attacking first instar nymphs. We've got natives that are destroying these insects. No idea how much or how much pressure they're exerting, but if you see them, let them do their work. And another great reason not to go crazy with the chemicals is to preserve our natives and let them eat these bugs, because we can't do it all on our own, and they're pretty good at it. And just wrapping up here, what can people do to help? Familiarize yourself with spotted lanternfly. Know what each life stage looks like. Know what each of the nymphal instars look like. They can be very tiny. Report your sighting to us. It always helps. We're not requiring sighting reports from Hartford or Cecil, But honestly, I'm not going to go through a fuss if people want to let us know they're still finding them in those counties. And then destroy it wherever you find it. Squish them by hand. If you want to use some kind of insecticide, you can. Just consider the application, be very judicious. There's a lot of novel methods like fly swatters and other things. Don't go crazy. There's one thing I didn't add, and I'm sure this group is at no risk of doing something wild, but please don't use petrochemicals or caustic solutions or, I don't know, other weird bombs to destroy lanternfly. People have told us before they've used pool chemicals to try and destroy lanternfly, and someone tried to demonstrate to one of the field crews using, I think, kerosene. They tried to like burn lanternfly with. Like, don't harm yourself or the environment to kill lanternfly. They're not worth it. And then the very last thing is, if you are, if it's pertinent to you, get a permit, be inspecting your vehicles, and keep records of those. And that's really for businesses again, but any member of the public can get a permit. It's good training, a good education, and you can't go wrong with it. And that's the end. That's Lanternfly in Maryland for 2023. This is our contact information, our website up top, our email, and the phone number. That number is generally for plant protection for the office. So if you call that, leave a message, you'll be directed down a phone tree to the Lanternfly hotline, or you'll just be directed over to towards the Lanternfly folks in general. But yeah, don't be surprised if you call and someone doesn't pick up saying hello Lanternfly. It'll be plant protection and weed management. But that's us. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time to share all this with you guys. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Kenton. That was actually many of the questions that came up, you've actually addressed as the slides progress, which was very good.
Oh, good deal.
Covered these in other audiences, and then the common questions I think you've covered. There was an interesting one about, are the eggs only found on tree bark, or would you find them on other plants or leaves?
So not on leaves. I've never seen an egg mass laid on a leaf. And actually the lanternfly don't feed on leaves. They might like be present, but they're typically only going to be feeding on branches and stems. The egg masses can be pretty much anywhere, not just on host trees, although that's where you'll most likely find them. So if you're cruising for egg masses, check your tree of heaven, your maples, black walnut, cherries first. But I found them on decks and trailers and outbuildings and stuff like that too. If it's vertical and flat, it's potentially egg mass at risk, at risk for egg masses. That's a better way of saying it.
Do are oak trees host for the lanternfly?
I've never seen them on oak. I'm sure they are, probably. They eat so much stuff, but I don't think I've ever seen a lanternfly feeding on oak. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever seen them feeding on oak. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen egg mass on oak either of any species.
Yeah, I noticed there was another question about Japanese maples as a host tree. Have you seen them in that?
No, I don't think I've ever seen them feeding or laying egg masses on Japanese maple either.
There's an interesting question here about an individual who lives near NIST, and on the map of the website showed that we were in a medium to heavy infestation, and they wanted to know whether that particular NIST was contacted about that. And there are tree of heaven trees along the public roads and are volunteers, and they could easily be removed.
If they could be easily removed, was that the question, or was it?
Yeah, well, that was one of the options, but they just wanted to know whether you contacted NIST about that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've not contacted them. A lot of our communications have been with, to date, have been with state agencies. So like state highways, Port of Baltimore, stuff like that, and state parks too. Unfortunately, have been kind of have accidentally been moving lanternfly around just from so much visitation. So I can't say specifically NIST. When it comes to tree of heaven removal, though, that is not something that state highways, if I'm understanding correctly, it's probably on a highway right away. If I know my NIST, that's nothing that they're doing currently. So that wouldn't be an option for them. If it is property that was administered by a private group that had the money to do it, or was just private property that somebody could remove the trees on, then yeah. But I don't imagine like a federal or state agency would be removing tree of heaven on those properties. And certainly that's not something that we're doing. Way back in the day, there was the strategy for herbiciding small tree of heaven and then leaving like single big stems to act as trap trees and systematizing those with imidacloprid. I'm sorry, with dinotephurin, active ingredient, neonicotinoid chemical. But we've kind of since stopped doing that too, just because there's so much tree of heaven and so much lanternfly. But that's an option for homeowners and for business owners that maybe want to try eliminating small or large kind of tree of heaven juveniles and then leaving single stems behind just to draw lanternfly to it and then systematize it and kill, ideally kill way more bugs than they would otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question here about, are egg masses at a typical height or at all heights? And is the lanternfly edible? And are there any crafts that you can use lanternfly wings with? I'm curious.
Yeah, edible, I don't know, probably. They probably taste really awful if they've been feeding on Tree of Heaven, because there's a metabolite that they've got in them. If they've not been feeding, then I have no idea. I guess the birds like them. So I would recommend cooking them with something. I don't imagine they taste like very much if they do. So maybe some olive oil and I don't know, a little bit of salt. Don't eat them raw. Bugs carry lots of parasites. So just always cook your bugs. And eat one. Don't do like you would with any wild food, I guess. Don't eat a whole handful. If you get sick, just kind of give it a little test. But the egg masses, a bit more practical. The egg masses, we're told, are generally at a height of about 8 meters or more. 8 meters or more. So that's like 24 feet. Basically, they like to lay their eggs in the canopy as much as they can. But we still find them pretty frequently down, like on the trunks or the undersides of branches. And the way we like to get rid of them is to take an extendable pole with a paint roller frame and just use that to reach into the tree and crush them. And it works well. It's a lot of work, but you can get, dependent upon your pole and your arms and your strength, you can reach like 15 feet up in the tree and crush everything up there. So that's kind of how we do it. But yeah, they tend to be 24 feet up into the canopy if they can get that high for those egg masses.
It's an interesting question here. I didn't see it, I don't think, in the slides. Is there a QR code for reporting just to make it easier for people to connect and fill out the survey forms?
So not on our current batch of outreach materials, although for the next round, I do want to add a QR code to like our pest alerts and wanted posters and stuff like that. Billboards, I don't think we can add QR codes to those. So the only thing that's going to carry a QR code at this point is going to be a series of ads that we have at BWI. So if anybody's going through baggage claim on your arrival, there'll be a QR code there. But yeah, largely speaking, we don't have anything like an app or something that someone can easily access other than just go into your browser and come into our website to find that survey.
There's a late question coming in here whether their egg masses are found on birdhouses or other non-living structures.
Yeah, for sure they are. If you're looking through your property, like when we go and survey, I'll check under benches and decks and birdhouses, and you'll find them. Playhouses, they'll be under those things. They tend to hide them. They wouldn't just like plaster it to the outside. Generally, where it's easily visible, they still like to go and find some little nook to hide their eggs in.
Do they prefer generally then smoother bark trees as opposed to some more rougher barks?
That's what we found. Occasionally, it seems like they'll like sneak underneath, a piece of bark that's peeled up. But it seems like in general they like stuff that is more smooth, as opposed to like really, really textured.
Well, Ken, thank you very much for that presentation and answering these questions. And I'll turn it back over to Linda.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Or Steve, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, give it back to Steve.
All right. Thanks, guys. Hey, thanks everyone. Thanks to the tech team and thanks to Kenton for his presentation. Thank you very much, Kenton. Just to wrap things up, as Linda mentioned earlier, we're going to have our August meeting. That's going to be Lynn Batdorf. He's going to be talking to us about boxwood, update us on some of the issues with boxwoods. But this September, we're going to have a face-to-face meeting over at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. I hope you all can make it. We're going to have one of our own, Eric Winger there presenting. So Again, I want to thank our tech team, Anthony and Dick, of course, Linda, and all the others. And a special thanks again to Danielle, our treasurer, for all the work she's done, tried to get everything squared away in a very, very short time. And I hope you go out and enjoy the rest of the day. It looks like it's pretty decent outside. So anyway, thanks everyone for coming. Hope to see you sometime soon in the future.